I found a dark web diary from a serial killer. Alright, so this is the kind of thing that you never expect to happen to you. I mean, you read about it online or see it in movies, but it's always someone else, right? Wrong. This is real, and it's happening to me. I need to share this because maybe someone out there can help me make sense of it. Here's what happened. It all started about 3 weeks ago. I've always been curious about the dark web, not for anything bad, just curiosity. There's a whole hidden part of the internet that we don't see, and it fascinates me. I've never bought anything illegal or done anything sketchy. I just browse forums and read stories. I know, it's a slippery slope, but I thought I had it under control. One night, I came across a link in a forum. It was one of those nondescript, plain text links with a caption like, "Read at your own risk." I should have closed the tab right then and there, but I didn't. I clicked the link, and it took me to what looked like a plain text document. It was a diary, but not just any diary. It was the diary of a serial killer. At first, I thought it was some kind of messed up creative writing project. The entries were detailed, graphic, and disturbingly real. The author wrote about his experiences, his victims, and his thoughts. It was chilling. I couldn't stop reading. It felt like a train wreck. You know you should look away, but you can't. The first entry was dated about 2 years ago. The author, who called himself The Watcher, described his first kill. He talked about the thrill of the hunt, the meticulous planning, and the satisfaction of finally doing it. He wrote about following his victim, a young woman, for weeks, learning her routine, and figuring out the perfect time to strike. He described how he grabbed her from behind, covered her mouth, and dragged her into an alley. The details were so vivid that I felt like I was there, watching it happen. He described every moment in excruciating detail. The way her body went limp after he strangled her, the sound of her last breath, the look in her eyes as life slipped away. He even described the way he felt, powerful, invincible, and alive. It was sickening. The next few entries were about his other victims. Each one was different, but the level of detail was the same. He wrote about their screams, their pleas for mercy, and the satisfaction he felt when he silenced them. He seemed to take pleasure in making them suffer, dragging out their final moments as long as possible. He wrote about how he would sometimes keep a piece of their clothing or a lock of their hair as a trophy. One entry that really stuck with me was about a young man he picked up at a bar. The Watcher described how he lured him back to his apartment, pretending to be interested in a one-night stand. Once they were inside, he tied the guy to a chair and took his time torturing him. He wrote about using a knife to carve patterns into the guy's skin, listening to him scream, and watching the blood flow. He even included a picture, a blurry, grainy image of a terrified face twisted in agony. That image is burned into my brain. As I read more, I started to feel like I was being watched. I know it sounds paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow made me jump. I started to regret ever clicking that link, but I couldn't stop reading. It was like the diary had a hold on me. Then I got to the last entry. It was dated the night I found the diary. It started like the others, but then it took a terrifying turn. The Watcher wrote about how he knew someone was reading his diary. He described how he could see them, sitting in their room, reading about his kills. He described their room in detail, the posters on the wall, the cluttered desk, the unmade bed. My blood ran cold as I realized he was describing my room. I slammed my laptop shut and looked around, my heart pounding in my chest. Was this some kind of sick joke? How could he know? I closed all the curtains and checked the locks on all the doors and windows. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence, that there was no way he could actually know I was reading his diary. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. He knew. I decided to dig deeper, to try and find out who the Watcher was. I spent hours online, going through forums, searching for any mention of him. I found nothing. It was like he didn't exist, except for that diary. Then about a week ago I started receiving emails. They were from a blocked sender, with no subject line. The messages were short, just a few sentences, but they were terrifying. I see you. You can't hide. I'm coming for you. I reported the emails to the police, but they said there was nothing they could do. They advised me to change my email address and be more careful online. I did, but the emails kept coming. It was like the Watcher was always one step ahead of me. Last night, I found a note taped to my front door. It was a single sheet of paper with one word written on it: soon. I'm scared out of my mind. I don't know what to do. I've locked all the doors and windows and I'm staying in a friend's house tonight. But I know it's only a matter of time before he finds me. I don't know why I'm sharing this here. Maybe I just need to get it off my chest, or maybe I'm hoping someone out there has some advice. All I know is that I'm in serious trouble and I don't know how to get out of it. If anyone has any ideas, please let me know. I'm desperate. I didn't think things could get any worse, but they did. It's been a week since I posted the first part, and things have escalated beyond my worst nightmares. I can't believe I'm living through this. Every moment feels like I'm balancing on the edge of a razor, waiting for the inevitable cut. After I moved in with my friend, I thought I might be safe, at least for a little while. My friend, let's call him Dan, was skeptical about the whole thing. He thought it was some kind of elaborate prank or that I was just being paranoid. He tried to make light of it, saying I was letting my imagination get the best of me. I almost believed him, but the fear wouldn't let go. 3 nights ago, something happened that shattered any illusions of safety I had. Dan and I were sitting in the living room, watching a movie, trying to distract ourselves from the looming dread. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the kitchen. We both jumped up and ran to see what had happened. The window over the sink was shattered, glass shards scattered all over the floor. A rock lay amidst the debris and tied around it was a piece of paper. My hands were shaking as I untied the note and unfolded it. The message was chillingly simple. You can't hide. Dan called the police, but like before, there wasn't much they could do. They took our statements, dusted for fingerprints, and told us to stay vigilant. Stay vigilant? Like that was going to help us. I felt a pit of despair in my stomach as I realized how helpless we were. The next day, Dan had to go to work, so I was left alone in his apartment. Every noise made me jump. I locked myself in the bedroom, trying to distract myself with anything I could find. Around noon, I got a call from a blocked number. I hesitated, but then answered. The voice on the other end was distorted, like it was coming through a bad connection or a voice changer. Enjoying the safety of your friend's place. The voice sent chills down my spine. It won't last. I'm closer than you think. I hung up and immediately called Dan, begging him to come home. He said he'd try to leave early, but it would be a few hours. Those hours felt like an eternity. I paced the apartment, checking the locks over and over. I knew I couldn't stay there. I needed to do something, to find a way to stop this. I decided to go back to my place. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe I thought I could find some clue, something I had missed before. I took an Uber back to my apartment, my heart pounding the whole way. When I got there, everything seemed normal, but I knew better than to trust appearances. I walked through the apartment, looking for anything out of place. When I reached my bedroom, I found another note taped to my computer screen. Nice try. That was all it said, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. How was he getting into my apartment? Was he watching me right now? I checked every corner of the apartment, but found nothing. I didn't know what else to do, so I grabbed my laptop and some clothes and headed back to Dan's place. On the way out, I noticed something strange. There was a black van parked across the street. It hadn't been there before. The windows were tinted, so I couldn't see inside, but I had a gut feeling it was him. Back at Dan's place, I tried to focus on finding more information about the Watcher. I scoured the dark web, looking for anything that could help. That's when I found it, a forum thread discussing the diary. Apparently, I wasn't the first person to find it. Several people had come across it and they all reported similar experiences, being watched, receiving threats, and ultimately, disappearing without a trace. One post stood out. It was from someone who claimed to have survived an encounter with the Watcher. They described how they had managed to escape, but had to go completely off the grid. They warned that the Watcher was more than just a man, he was part of a network, a group of people who shared his twisted desires. They called themselves the Circle. The post included some advice. If you're reading this, you need to get out. Leave everything behind. Change your name, your appearance, your life. It's the only way to survive. I showed the post to Dan. He was finally starting to take things seriously. We discussed our options, but nothing seemed feasible. How could I just disappear? I had a job, a life. But the alternative was unthinkable. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside made me jump. Around 3 a.m., I heard something that made my blood run cold, a soft tapping on the window. I froze, straining to hear. The tapping continued, rhythmic and deliberate. I crept out of bed and peeked through the blinds. A figure stood outside, just beyond the light, their face obscured by a hood. I woke Dan, and we called the police again. By the time they arrived, the figure was gone, but they found something that made my stomach churn, a bloody handprint on the window. It was a message, a promise of what was to come. We decided then and there that we had to leave. Dan called in some favors, and we arranged to stay with his cousin in another state. We packed up and left that morning, driving through the day and into the night. I hoped that putting distance between us and the apartment would help, but deep down, I knew it wasn't over. The journey was tense. Every car that followed us for more than a few miles made my heart race. Every rest stop felt like a potential ambush. When we finally arrived at Dan's cousin's place, I felt a momentary sense of relief. But it didn't last. The first night at Dan's cousin's house was uneventful. We tried to relax, to convince ourselves that we were safe. But the next morning, I found another note slipped under the door. "You can run, but you can't hide." I'm at my wit's end. I don't know what to do. We've changed locations, but he still found us. The Watcher and his circle are relentless. I can't keep putting Dan and his family in danger. I need a plan, something that can end this once and for all. If anyone out there has any advice, please, I'm begging you, help me. I didn't think things could get worse, but every time I think we've hit rock bottom, something else happens. It's been a few days since we arrived at Dan's cousin's house, and I'm starting to lose hope. The Watcher is relentless. I don't know how he's tracking us, but he is. I can't shake the feeling that every move we make is being watched. Dan's cousin, Emma, has been a saint through all of this. She didn't hesitate to take us in, even though she had no idea what kind of danger she was putting herself in. We tried to explain the situation, but how do you tell someone that a psychopathic killer is hunting you down? It sounds insane, even to me. The first couple of days were quiet, and I almost let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we had lost him. Emma's house is in a small town, far from any major city, and I hoped that the isolation would work in our favor. But deep down I knew it was only a matter of time before the Watcher found us. 2 nights ago, I woke up to a sound I'll never forget. It was a low guttural moan, almost like an animal in pain. I bolted upright, my heart pounding. The noise was coming from outside. I crept to the window and peeked out. There, in the backyard, was a figure standing in the shadows. He was holding something. No. Someone. I woke Dan and Emma, whispering frantically. We watched in horror as the figure dragged a struggling form into the light. It was a young woman, her hands bound, her mouth gagged. She was sobbing, her eyes wide with terror. The Watcher turned and looked directly at me, even though I knew he couldn't see me through the glass. It felt like he was staring into my soul. He pulled out a knife and pressed it to the woman's throat. I could see the glint of the blade in the moonlight. He didn't say a word, but the message was clear. Come outside, or she dies. I couldn't move, paralyzed by fear. Dan grabbed my arm, his face pale. We have to do something, he whispered. Before we could decide, Emma's phone rang. The sound was jarringly loud in the tense silence. I grabbed it and answered. It was a distorted voice, the same one that had called me before. If you want her to live, you'll come outside, alone. The line went dead. I didn't have a choice. I knew if I didn't go out there, that girl was dead. I told Dan and Emma to stay inside and call the police, even though I knew it would be too late. I took a deep breath and stepped outside. The air was cold, and I could see my breath in the dim light. The Watcher stood there, holding the girl in front of him like a shield. He smiled, a sickeningly calm expression that made my skin crawl. Let her go, I said, my voice trembling. This is between you and me. He laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. Oh, it's very much between us, but she's part of it now. You see, I wanted to make sure you understood the stakes. You keep running and more people will suffer. I took a step closer, my hands raised. Please, just let her go. I'll do whatever you want. He tightened his grip on the girl, and she whimpered. What I want, he said slowly, is for you to stop hiding. You're mine now, and there's no escaping that. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing, trying to think of a way to save the girl without getting us both killed. Then, out of nowhere, a blinding light flooded the yard. The sound of sirens filled the air. Emma had called the police, and they were here. The Watcher snarled, pushing the girl to the ground. This isn't over, he hissed, before disappearing into the darkness. The police swarmed the yard, guns drawn, but it was too late. He was gone. The girl was shaken but alive. She told the police that she had been walking home from work when he grabbed her. She didn't know who he was or why he had taken her. I felt a wave of relief that she was safe, but I knew it was only temporary. The police took our statements and promised to keep an eye on the house, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. The Watcher was too good at what he did. He would be back. We spent the next day on edge, waiting for the next move. That evening, I got another email. It was a video file, and I hesitated before opening it. When I finally did, I almost wished I hadn't. The video showed a dark room, lit only by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. In the center of the room was a chair, and tied to the chair was a man I didn't recognize. His face was battered, his clothes torn. The watcher stepped into the frame, holding a camera. He smiled that same chilling smile. "This is what happens when you try to run," he said, his voice calm and measured. He turned to the man in the chair and began to torture him, all while looking directly into the camera. The man's screams were haunting, echoing in my mind long after the video ended. I felt sick. I knew the man in the video was dead, and it was my fault. The watcher was proving a point. No matter where I went, no matter how far I ran, he would find me. And anyone who got in his way would suffer. I showed the video to Dan and Emma. Emma was in tears, and Dan looked like he was going to be sick. We knew we couldn't stay there. We had to leave, to find somewhere he couldn't follow. But where? How do you escape someone who seems to be everywhere? We packed up again, this time with no plan. No destination. We just drove, trying to put as much distance between us and the nightmare as possible. But even as we drove, I knew it was futile. He would find us. It was only a matter of time. As we crossed state lines, I got another email. This time, it was just a single sentence. "I'm closer than you think. I don't know what to do. I'm running out of options, and I'm terrified. If anyone out there has any advice, any way to stop this, please, I'm begging you, help me. I can't keep living like this. This will probably be my last update. Things have escalated to a point where I don't think I can come back from this. I'm scared, exhausted, and running out of hope, but I need to get this out there, just in case something happens to me." After we left Emma's house, we drove for hours, not stopping until we were sure we had put enough distance between us and the watcher. We ended up in a small, out-of-the-way motel. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions, and the anonymity was a small comfort. We checked in under fake names, paying in cash. Dan and I took turns keeping watch while the others slept. Every noise outside made us jump. I was constantly checking my phone, waiting for the next email, the next threat. But for 2 days, there was nothing. No messages, no sightings. It was eerily quiet. On the third night, I finally let my guard down a bit. We were all exhausted, and I thought maybe, just maybe, we had managed to slip away. We were sitting in the tiny motel room, eating takeout and trying to distract ourselves with bad TV when the power went out. The sudden darkness was like a punch to the gut. I grabbed my phone, using the screen's light to navigate. Then, the emails started. My phone buzzed relentlessly as message after message came through. Each one was a picture, blurry and dark, but unmistakably of us, me, Dan, and Emma, taken from outside the motel. My blood ran cold. He was here. Dan grabbed his keys, and we bolted for the car. We didn't even pack our things, just left everything behind. We sped out of the parking lot, driving blindly, trying to put as much distance between us and the motel as possible. My phone kept buzzing, but I couldn't bring myself to look at the messages. I knew what they would say. We drove for hours, not talking, just trying to outrun the fear. Eventually, we found ourselves in a remote area, surrounded by woods. We pulled off the road, too tired to keep going. I checked my phone again. The last message was a video. I hesitated, but then clicked play. The video was dark and shaky, but I recognized the motel room. The watcher's voice came through, distorted as always. "You can't escape," he whispered. The camera panned to the bed, and my heart nearly stopped. Emma was lying there, unconscious or worse. Dan screamed and grabbed the phone, but it was too late. The screen went black. I don't know how he got to her. One moment she was with us, and the next, she was gone. Dan was frantic, trying to call her phone, but there was no answer. I felt a wave of guilt and despair. This was my fault. If I hadn't found that diary, none of this would be happening. We drove back to the motel, hoping against hope that she was still there, that we could somehow save her. But when we arrived, the room was empty. No sign of Emma, no sign of the watcher. Just an overwhelming sense of dread. Dan was losing it, shouting and tearing the room apart, looking for any clue. I tried to calm him down, but he was inconsolable. We called the police, but I knew it was pointless. The watcher was always one step ahead. We spent the next day searching the area, asking anyone if they had seen Emma, but it was like she had vanished into thin air. Every hour that passed made the situation more hopeless. Dan was a wreck, and I wasn't much better. The fear and guilt were eating me alive. Last night, I got another email. It was just a location, coordinates to a spot in the woods nearby. I knew it was a trap, but I couldn't ignore it. I convinced Dan that we had to go, that it might be our only chance to save Emma. Reluctantly, he agreed. We drove to the location, arriving just as the sun was setting. The woods were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. We followed a narrow path, my phone's GPS guiding us. As we walked, I felt like we were being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made my heart race. Finally, we reached a clearing. In the center was a small, run-down cabin. The door was ajar and a faint light flickered inside. We approached cautiously, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But I couldn't. We had to find Emma. Inside, the cabin was dark and cold. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and something else, something metallic. Blood. We moved deeper into the cabin, the floorboards creaking under our weight. In the back room, we found her. Emma was tied to a chair, her face bruised and swollen. She looked up as we entered, and the relief in her eyes broke my heart. We rushed to her, untying the ropes and checking her injuries. She was weak, but alive. As we helped her up, a voice echoed through the cabin. "Leaving so soon?" The watcher stepped out of the shadows, a knife glinting in his hand. He moved with a predator's grace, his eyes cold and calculating. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" Dan lunged at him, but the watcher was faster. He sidestepped, slashing Dan's arm with the knife. Blood sprayed, and Dan fell to the ground, clutching his wound. I grabbed a piece of broken wood from the floor and swung it at the watcher, but he blocked it effortlessly, knocking me to the ground. He loomed over me, his face twisted in a cruel smile. "You've been fun to play with," he said, raising the knife. "But all games must come to an end." Just as he was about to strike, there was a blinding flash of light and a deafening bang. The watcher staggered back, dropping the knife. Emma had found a flare gun and fired it at him. He screamed, his clothes catching fire, and stumbled out of the cabin, disappearing into the night. We didn't wait to see what happened next. We helped Dan up and made our way back to the car, Emma leaning on me for support. We drove to the nearest hospital, praying that we had finally escaped. Dan's wound was deep, but he would survive. Emma was treated for her injuries, and we all gave statements to the police. They promised to search the area and find the watcher, but I wasn't holding my breath. He was too good at disappearing. Now, we're in a safe house, waiting for the all clear. I don't know if we'll ever truly be safe, but for now, we're alive. And that's enough. I don't know what's going to happen next. Maybe the watcher will find us again. Or maybe he'll move on to someone else. All I know is that I can't keep running. I have to face this, to find a way to stop him once and for all. To anyone reading this, be careful. The dark web is a dangerous place, and some things can't be unseen. If you ever come across a diary like the one I found, don't read it. Close the tab, shut down your computer, and walk away. Some things are better left in the dark. And to the watcher, if you're reading this, I'm not afraid anymore. I'll find you, and I'll make sure you never hurt anyone else again. This isn't over. Not by a long shot.